So just went for a drive, and we're having a look at the log file for what we just did. Now, VersaTuner has this very annoying problem. I'll just show you on the log file actually. So if we open the log that I did, this shit happens. Now, this happens very occasionally, probably maybe 30-40% of the time that you log. There's no way to tell that it's happening, but it just does it. I don't know why it does it. It drives me mental. Because virtually the log file is in a negative time, which doesn't make any logical sense. And the log file's virtually useless. So I've got to go back out and do another log. Because, if we open up in the spreadsheet version, you can see the time is minus 4,278. And it just goes down and down and down. And it gets to the point where it looks okay. It looks like it logs. But it's just broken. I don't understand why it does it. So we open it in MegaLog. And see it does the same thing here. So what I generally, if I really need to do something with it, I'll come back into here and go, okay, well, anything from 479 seconds, we'll just remove it. Problem is 479 seconds doesn't exist here. And it goes to 16 seconds. So yeah, anyway, here's what it is there. Just going to remove that log and do it again. So that drive, so version 3.15 for those, the MAF change and the VE adjustment. So just reset the VE back to default, essentially. Interpolated a few cells, but yeah, it's pretty close. Now, looking at the MAF again, so MAF is reading correctly at the top end. So highest was 1.523 absolute load, and the boost pressure was 7.2 or 7.3. So it's pretty much on point now. Now, the problem that I have is that it's still running pretty damn rich. Now, what I'm going to do is, instead of taking it out of the VE, I'm going to take it out of the MAF. So this lean spot just here, so it goes, from cruising down to very rich. And you see I lift my foot a little bit and sort of plateau and then put it back down again. So you've got to keep in mind that in the log, the AFRs don't entirely match exactly what happened in the engine at that exact moment. There is a slight delay between when the O2 picks it up and when it actually happened. So essentially this lean spot just here would be where I took my foot off a little bit and then put it back down again, and then it went rich again. So instead of doing VE, we're going to do a bit more on the MAF. So what we can sort of make out here is we'll look at the airflow at this point here. So when things start to increase, so that's at 2.8 volts on the MAF, which is about here, and that's when it goes into open loop, and you can't see the trims. So you've got to correct it. Now you can see here, this is a bit more of a higher load area, higher RPM, but it's definitely out by a bit, which would contribute to running rich in those areas. But then you have a look on the next line down at 3,000 RPM, and more of a cruising RPM, it is pulling a little bit of fuel out. So it's also pulling it out here, it's pulling it out here, except for that one, obviously. And lower RPM, it's adding it. So it's hard to interpret which way is which, whether you pull it or add it. But being that the RX-8 generally is not going to be cruising around at 2,500 RPM, it's always 3,000 RPM or up. Even on the highway, 100 Ks an hour in 6th gear, you're going to be doing 3,000 to 3,200. So it's going to be more in this areas. This is more like, when you're you've changed gear and you're doing 40 k's an hour in a school zone or something like that. So we'll focus more on this area, but yeah, you can sort of work it out down here that this is more of your cruising areas and so on. But they're all pretty good. I'm not going to worry too much about these ones. So we'll focus on this and pull a little bit out until we get to the higher end of the MAF where it's actually reading correctly. So about 1.2, so between 0.7 load and 1.3 load really is the problem child there. Anything above that is fine. And in between is where we need to pull a little bit out. So we'll look at the voltages, so 2.8 volts through to 3.3. So 2.8 to 3.3. So this area here is where it's a little bit too aggressive. So that needs to come down a little bit, which will give us a leaner run and a bit more of a curve on the MAF to go, from cruising straight up into boost territory. So I'll just do some maths on that and see what we come up with. All right, so I got the VersaTuner MAF calibration sheet. So let's just give this a try and see what it does. So we'll take our values from the MAF calibration. So that's the voltages. Paste it down here, copy it again, and then paste it down here as this one, so transposed, and puts it on a downward axis. Get rid of these because they don't need to be there. All right, so let's have a look at our MAF in the log here. So we want to try and look at voltages that match pretty damn close. So let's say 3.3 volts there. So 3359, 3370. So that's perfect. So we've got 11.504. 11.504. 504? Yeah, 504. And our desired, so that's where we match up our load. So 130% load at 4,500 RPM. There we have a look at our AFR table. 130% load, 4,500 RPM should be 11.83. So 11.83. Beautiful. Now we can work our way back. So we'll go back down a little bit. 3.260. Yeah, 3.242, that's all right. And we've got 11.513 as well. And that's at 4,600 RPM. And the load is still it's 1.2 load now. What was that RPM? 43, 46. It's closer to 45 than 44,000. But it's still 11.83, so 11.83. Okay, now we go back another one. 3.140. So we can see there's a bit of a weird situation happening there. That's why I don't trust this spreadsheet very much. Because if we take out 14%, yeah, that's a big jump. Like that's a huge jump. Now, that could just be volumetric efficiency doing that because, the MAF curve is pretty straight. Like it spikes when boost kicks in, as you can tell. It just skyrockets, which is normal because airflow is increasing. But it wouldn't be just a dive, like it wouldn't just go as flatline and just skyrocket through the roof. it's got to be linear there, and it is linear here. As you can see, the grams are increasing. So yeah, I'm reluctant to add that much to it. So I'm going to think about this and see what the best way is to do, whether we do it through the MAF or through the VE. I'm kind of leaning towards VE now, but yeah, I just want to have a think about it and see what's going to be best. Alrighty, we are back again with some more tuning on the RX-8. So last time we got into a bit more of the MAF calibration side, and pretty much aligned the absolute load or the calculated load with the MAF calibration to align the calculated engine load with the boost pressure. Now, after a couple of days of driving, I had some weird results on the MAF calibration, which I did not expect to happen. I'm not 100% sure what changed. Like the weather here did change. Yeah, so the weather changed here. Yeah, we were getting 33 degrees Celsius every day, and we're now getting 24 degrees. And it's dropping to like 15 degrees overnight. So that happened literally within the span of maybe 2 days, and it was while I was tuning. So the first couple of videos I did, it was 32, 33 degrees Celsius, and now it's 24, 25. Whether that has affected the calculations, I honestly don't know. But yeah, I went for a drive, and yeah, at 7 in PSI, I was sitting at about 145% load, and yeah, it needed to be 155 or 150% load. So yeah, we're going to go back through and recalculate that and get that all going. So we'll switch over to the computer and have a look, see what that looks like. So I have decided to just use AI for this part. Yeah, like I said, one day I will figure out the maths and figure it out, but I do this so little that I don't really care to memorize everything about it. Now, what I've done is I've taken a few points for the load percentage, the boost value that it reckons it should have had versus the boost value that I know I had, and compared it with the mass airflow voltage and given it to ChatGPT to give me a correction. So 3.86 volts, 5,500 RPM, 175% load. It was reporting 11 PSI, but actually 9.2. So it's given a correction factor, and I've done that for a couple of points. And then it's pretty much taken it and said, right, reduce this value by 7%, reduce 3.9 by 3.7%, and reduce 3.93 by 5.7%. So I've done that in my MAF calibration here to bring everything back down a little bit, and then reinterpolate it to smooth it all out. So you can see it's pretty good there. There was, a few little points here. So last save, let's say, this one here, 3.2. So it's gone down by 5 grams a second. This one's gone down by about 8 grams. This one's gone down by about 8. Gone down by 6. Gone down by 3. So it's not a massive difference, but one thing to keep in mind, and it's a little bit confusing, is your absolute load is calculated by your mass airflow. Now, the mass airflow sensor obviously reads the amount of air going through it, and gives the ECU the absolute load value. So it's a calculated value that it does internally. So it knows that at certain RPM, it requires a certain amount of airflow, which is considered its load value, and knows at that point what ignition timing to set based off of your ignition timing tables and its load value there. Now, you could have 7,000 RPM and only be at like 70% load, or you could be at 7,000 RPM and be at 170% load. It's dependent on the amount of load essentially the engine is doing, which is your pedal position, and the amount of mass airflow, or the amount of air flowing through the MAF sensor. So it's not always going to be perfect, and this is why you kind of want to have your throttle angle at least 50% or more. So when you're doing this, it's not going to be skewed by the amount of throttle that you're using, because if you sit at 7,000 RPM at 15-20% throttle, your load's going to start decreasing, because you're not technically loading the engine up as much, even though it's spinning fast. because, the RPMs, the revolutions are actually 7,000 RPM. But there's not as much load on the engine because you're not accelerating or you're putting the engine under load. And the ECU knows this by throttle RPM increases and how, it does its math in there. But just keep that in mind that, you sort of got to make sure that you are putting the engine under load when you do this calibration. Because if you don't, it's going to get skewed results. So now that we've corrected those values, so like I said, it's not much, it's only a small amount. I'm going to give this a try and see how it goes, but it is raining here again, so putting my foot down in this car in the wet is just a pain in the ass, and so I can't exactly get a proper log until it stops raining and it dries out. So I'll upload this, go for another drive, and see what that log looks like, and see if we can make sure that the areas up here now are actually reading correctly compared to the boost level. And being it was only 7%, 5 or 7%, it wasn't a great deal, but I was losing, on average about probably 2 to 3 degrees of timing advance in the top, which definitely affects power as well. So I want to make sure that's right. And then we'll come back and we'll see what it's like in the next log. Ready. So we've gone for a drive. Everything's looking a hell of a lot better than what it was. So I haven't revved the car past 6,000 RPM on that calibration yet. So this time I revved it to 7,000, and that's when the MAF calibration really stood out, that there was a little bit of discrepancy in what I was looking at versus what was actually happening. So in this video, essentially I've recorrected that calibration. So everything else below, say 100 grams per second was perfectly fine. It was all in line with what we needed. But as it went from 100 grams up into the boosted territory, that's when things started to get a little bit iffy. So that's the hardest part to do, is when you don't have an O2 sensor correcting your trims, you've really got to go off of the requested AFR versus what was logged in the AFR. So that could be, it could be spot on. You could have guessed it right. Most of the time, you're probably going to get within 10%. So once you get to the stage where you can drive it around, it's perfectly fine at lower RPMs, and then you can work on the higher RPM side. Don't try and do it all at once. It's just going to make a mess. So now we're at that point where we've corrected everything all the way up to 7,000 RPM. And the load is matching the boost levels, so it was out by about 10%, upwards of that 250 grams per 3 to 300 grams. Now I can go from 7,000 RPM to 8,000 RPM, and 8,000 is my red line right now. So once I've done that, if it needs correction, I might post another video about it, but otherwise, that'll pretty much be it for the MAF calibration side. And the next one will be on the fuel map and ignition timing, if I get time to do that. Otherwise, I might just jump straight to the Adaptronic and get that done. But seems like because Adaptronic is no longer available, it's a bit hard to say, is it worth even doing a video on that, because there's not many left, where most people are going to be using Mazda Edit or VersaTuner. We'll skip over to that and see how the car runs now, and we'll see you in the next one.